I never thought I'd come face to face with the supernatural. Growing up, ghost stories were something to laugh about during campfire nights, not something I'd imagine experiencing firsthand. But what I encountered at the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado, shattered every doubt I had about the existence of things we can't explain. It all started as a casual getaway, a much-needed break from the grind of everyday life. I had heard about the Stanley Hotel's eerie reputation, but I wasn't there for the ghosts. To me, it was just a historic site nestled in the Rockies, with breathtaking views and a rich history. What I didn't know was that the infamous Room 401 was about to become a pivotal chapter in my life. Driving up to the Stanley, you're greeted by the grandeur of a bygone era. The pristine white facade, the sprawling grounds, and the surrounding mountain peaks, all of it seemed more enchanting than foreboding. I arrived just before sunset, and the building glowed warmly under the fading light. At check-in, the receptionist handed me my room key with a smile that seemed to falter slightly when I read the number. Room 401. "Oh, that's one of our more talked-about rooms," she said cautiously. "Talked about?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Some guests have had, interesting experiences there," she replied, clearly choosing her words carefully. I brushed it off with a chuckle, attributing her hesitation to the hotel's reputation for ghost stories. I didn't consider myself a skeptic or a believer. I was neutral, a curious observer at best. As I stepped into room 401, it felt like stepping back in time. The vintage furniture, the ornate mirror above the dresser, and the faint smell of old wood created an ambience of quiet elegance. Yet there was something about the air. It felt heavier, almost charged, as if the room itself was aware of my presence. I shook off the feeling and began to unpack. But as I placed my suitcase on the bed, a peculiar sensation washed over me. It felt like someone was watching me. I turned around quickly, but the room was empty. "Get it together," I muttered to myself, dismissing the feeling as nerves. Nightfall came, and with it, an unsettling quiet. I decided to settle in with a book before bed. That's when the strangeness began. At first, it was subtle, a faint creaking sound coming from the closet. I glanced up but saw nothing unusual. A few minutes later, the sound came again, this time louder, as if someone were shifting their weight on the wooden floor. I put the book down and approached the closet, my heart pounding in my chest. Slowly, I opened the door, half expecting something to jump out. But the closet was empty. I laughed nervously, trying to convince myself it was just the old building settling. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. Later that night, as I was brushing my teeth, something in the mirror caught my eye. It was subtle at first, a faint shadow that seemed to move behind me. I turned around quickly, but the bathroom was empty. When I looked back at the mirror, the shadow was gone. Just your imagination, I told myself, though my pulse was racing. As I climbed into bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The room seemed to grow colder, and the once cozy atmosphere now felt oppressive. Sometime around midnight, I woke to the sound of faint whispers. At first, I thought it was a dream, but the sound grew louder. It was indistinct, like multiple voices speaking at once, but the words were unintelligible. I sat up in bed, straining to hear. The whispers seemed to be coming from the corner of the room where the dresser stood. I turned on the bedside lamp, but the sound stopped abruptly. Then, as I sat there trying to make sense of it, the lamp flickered and went out. My breath caught in my throat as the room plunged into darkness. That's when I saw him. In the faint moonlight streaming through the window, a figure stood at the foot of my bed. He was tall, dressed in what appeared to be 19th-century attire, a long coat, high boots, and a cravat. His face was partially obscured, but his eyes seemed to pierce right through me. I froze, unable to move or speak. The figure didn't move either, but the air around him seemed to ripple, as if he were made of smoke. And then, just as suddenly as he appeared, he vanished. Sometime around midnight, I woke to the sound of faint whispers. At first, I thought it was a dream, but the sound grew louder. It was indistinct, like multiple voices speaking at once, but the words were unintelligible. I sat up in bed, straining to hear. The whispers seemed to be coming from the corner of the room where the dresser stood. I turned on the bedside lamp, but the sound stopped abruptly. Then, as I sat there trying to make sense of it, the lamp flickered and went out. My breath caught in my throat as the room plunged into darkness. That's when I saw him. In the faint moonlight streaming through the window, a figure stood at the foot of my bed. He was tall, dressed in what appeared to be 19th century attire, a long coat, high boots, and a cravat. His face was partially obscured, but his eyes seemed to pierce right through me. I froze, unable to move or speak. The figure didn't move either, but the air around him seemed to ripple, as if he were made of smoke. And then, just as suddenly as he appeared, he vanished. When daylight finally broke, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. The room looked normal again, the oppressive energy gone. I went downstairs to the lobby, still shaken but desperate to make sense of what had happened. That's when I overheard another guest talking about the history of the hotel, specifically room 401. That's the room where Lord Dunraven's ghost is often seen, they said casually, as if it were common knowledge. Apparently, Lord Dunraven, the previous owner of the land on which the Stanley was built, had a dark reputation. Stories of his misdeeds and eerie presence lingered long after his death. I couldn't bring myself to tell anyone about my encounter, not yet. But I knew I had to stay another night. I needed to know if what I experienced was real or just a figment of my imagination. That evening, I prepared myself for whatever might happen. I brought out my phone to record any strange occurrences and even set up a makeshift alarm system with a glass of water perched precariously on the edge of the dresser. What I didn't realize was that I was about to experience something far more terrifying than the night before. Staying another night in room 401 wasn't a decision I made lightly. My curiosity was battling my fear, and I felt this overwhelming need to understand what was happening in that room. Was I losing my mind, or was there something, or someone, truly haunting me? As the sun set behind the Rocky Mountains, the Stanley Hotel transformed. The warm, welcoming glow it held during the day seemed to darken with the night. Shadows stretched longer, corners seemed deeper, and the air felt colder. I could hear the faint creaks and groans of the old building as I climbed the grand staircase to the second floor. With every step closer to room 401, my heart pounded harder. I tried to steady myself, reminding myself I was here to uncover the truth. But deep down, I couldn't shake the growing sense of dread. When I reached the room, I hesitated before unlocking the door. The brass key felt heavier in my hand, and for a brief moment, I considered going back downstairs and asking for another room. But something compelled me to push forward. This time, I wasn't going in unprepared. I had read about methods to document paranormal activity, things like temperature changes, electronic voice phenomena, EVPs, and motion disturbances. While I didn't have any professional equipment, I made do with what I had: my phone, a flashlight, and a small notebook to jot down anything unusual. The first thing I noticed when I entered the room was the mirror. It was an antique, oval-shaped mirror with an ornate wooden frame that seemed far too polished for its age. Its surface gleamed faintly in the dim light, and I couldn't help but feel like it was watching me. I decided to leave it uncovered this time. If anything happened, I wanted to see it. At first, the room was eerily quiet. I sat on the edge of the bed, phone in hand, waiting for something, anything to happen. Hours passed, and I started to feel foolish. Maybe I had imagined everything the night before. Around midnight, the temperature in the room dropped suddenly. My breath came out in faint puffs, and goosebumps prickled my arms. I checked the thermostat; it hadn't moved. Then, I heard it again, the faint whispers. This time they were clearer, almost rhythmic, like a chant. The sound seemed to be coming from the corner where the dresser stood. I turned on the flashlight and aimed it at the corner, but there was nothing there. I approached cautiously, my heart racing. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they stopped abruptly as I reached the dresser. And then the mirror, still uncovered, showed something I will never forget. In the reflection, the room appeared darker, almost distorted, like I was looking into another version of it. At first, it was just me staring back, wide-eyed and pale. But then, a figure emerged behind me. It was him, Lord Dunraven, or whatever manifestation of him lingered in this place. His face was clearer now, angular features, a prominent mustache, and eyes that burned with an intensity I can only describe as malevolent. He raised a hand and pointed at me through the mirror. My body froze, rooted to the spot. His lips moved, but no sound came out. It felt like he was trying to communicate, but whatever barrier existed between his world and mine muffled his words. And then he disappeared. I stumbled back, breathing heavily, my mind racing. What was he trying to tell me? The next morning, I couldn't stay silent any longer. I went straight to the hotel's concierge, a woman named Linda who had worked there for decades. When I mentioned room 401, her expression shifted. "Not many people ask about that room," she said cautiously. I told her about my experiences, the whispers, the figure in the mirror, the oppressive feeling that something was watching me. Linda sighed and motioned for me to follow her. In a small room behind the front desk, she pulled out an old leather-bound book. It was a record of the hotel's history, filled with photographs, guest accounts, and handwritten notes. She turned to a page marked with a faded ribbon. "This is Lord Dunraven," she said, pointing to a sepia-toned photograph of a man in formal attire. I felt a chill run down my spine. It was him, the man from the mirror. According to Linda, Lord Dunraven had owned the land before the hotel was built. He was a controversial figure, known for his questionable dealings and a string of mysterious disappearances in the area. "Some say he had a fascination with the occult," Linda said. "Others believe he cursed the land when he lost it." That evening, I decided to take matters into my own hands. If Lord Dunraven was trying to communicate, I needed to listen. I set up a simple séance in the room. Using candles, a piece of paper, and a pen, I focused all my energy on creating a connection. At first, nothing happened. The room was silent save for the flicker of the candle flames. But then, the pen began to move. It scratched across the paper in jagged strokes, forming words. "Leave now." I stared at the message, my hands trembling. "What do you want?" I whispered. The pen moved again, this time slower, as if it were struggling to form the words. "His land, his curse." Suddenly, the candles blew out, plunging the room into darkness. The oppressive energy returned, stronger than before. I felt an overwhelming sense of danger, as if I were being suffocated by an unseen force. That night, I experienced the most terrifying event of all. Around 3 a.m., I woke to the sensation of someone sitting on the edge of the bed. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. When I opened my eyes, Lord Dunraven was there, looming over me. His face was inches from mine, and his eyes burned with anger. "You don't belong here," he growled, his voice echoing as if it came from everywhere at once. I closed my eyes, praying for it to end. When I opened them again, he was gone. I left the Stanley Hotel the next morning, unable to spend another moment in that room. To this day, I can't explain what I experienced. Was it Lord Dunraven's spirit, bound to the land he once owned? Or was it something darker, feeding off the energy of those who dared to enter his domain? What I do know is this: Room 401 is not just a room. It's a portal to something we can't understand. Leaving the Stanley Hotel wasn't the end of my encounter with Room 401. In truth, my departure only deepened my obsession. Questions plagued me. Who or what was Lord Dunraven in life, and what tied his spirit to the room? Why had he warned me to leave, and what did his cryptic words about a curse mean? I knew I wouldn't find peace until I uncovered the full story. Months later, after countless nights of tossing and turning, I decided to return to Estes Park. This time, I wasn't going to the Stanley as a guest, but as a researcher. My goal was clear: to uncover the truth about Lord Dunraven's curse and its connection to the haunting of Room 401. I reached out to local historians, archivists, and paranormal enthusiasts who had studied the area. Estes Park was rich with stories, many of them tinged with supernatural elements, but Lord Dunraven's tale was among the most chilling. My first stop was the Estes Park Historical Museum. A curator named Marjorie, who had lived in the town her entire life, eagerly shared what she knew. Lord Dunraven wasn't well liked, she began, her tone cautious. He was an Irish aristocrat who bought up thousands of acres here in the late 1800s. The locals accused him of shady dealings, tricking homesteaders into selling their land and exploiting the area for hunting and personal gain. She paused, lowering her voice. But the darkest rumors are tied to the disappearances. Disappearances? I asked, leaning in. Marjorie nodded gravely. Several young women vanished during his time here. Some say they were servants. Others believe they were local girls. No one knows for sure what happened to them, but after Dunraven left, people started finding shallow graves in the woods. A chill ran down my spine. Was it possible these victims were tied to the supernatural events in room 401? Marjorie handed me a leather-bound ledger with entries from the late 1800s. Flipping through its yellowed pages, I found records of complaints against Dunraven, claims of theft, trespassing, and worse. One entry caught my eye. A young woman named Margaret disappeared from the estate on October 17, 1876. Locals suspect foul play. The date sent a shiver through me. It matched the anniversary of my second night in room 401, the night Dunraven's spirit had appeared. My next lead came from a local paranormal investigator named Carter, who had spent years documenting hauntings in Colorado. When I mentioned room 401, his eyes lit up with a mix of excitement and trepidation. "I've investigated the Stanley several times," he said. "Room 401 is one of the most active spots. People report shadow figures, strange voices, and a sense of being watched. But the mirror is the real focal point. It's like a doorway." "A doorway to what?" I asked. Carter hesitated. "To him, Dunraven isn't just haunting that room, he's guarding it. There's something in that space he doesn't want anyone to find." His words lingered in my mind. What was Dunraven protecting, and why? Determined to uncover the truth, I arranged a private visit to the Stanley Hotel. With the manager's permission, I spent an afternoon in room 401, searching for clues. I started with the mirror. It was bolted to the wall, its surface eerily pristine despite its age. Running my fingers along the frame, I felt a faint draft. Could there be a hidden compartment behind it? Using a small screwdriver, I carefully pried the mirror away from the wall. What I found sent my heart racing, a small, concealed door built into the wood paneling. The door creaked open to reveal a narrow passageway, barely wide enough to crawl through. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed my flashlight and ventured inside. The passage led to a hidden chamber, a small stone-lined room that reeked of damp earth. In the center was a wooden chest, its surface covered in strange, faded symbols. As I opened the chest, the air seemed to grow heavier. Inside, I found several items: a bundle of old letters, a tarnished locket, and a journal bound in cracked leather. The journal belonged to Lord Dunraven. Its pages were filled with ramblings about power, immortality, and rituals. One entry stood out. "The women were necessary. Their sacrifice binds me to this place. As long as the rites are upheld, I will endure." I recoiled in horror. Dunraven hadn't just been a greedy landowner. He had dabbled in dark rituals, using human lives to anchor his spirit to the physical world. The disappearances, the graves in the woods, they were all part of his twisted quest for eternal power. Suddenly, I felt a cold breeze and turned to see the figure of Dunraven materialize in the chamber. His face was twisted with fury and his voice boomed, "You should have stayed away." The room erupted with energy. The walls seemed to close in, and the air vibrated with an unearthly hum. Dunraven's form grew larger, his shadow stretching across the chamber. Summoning every ounce of courage, I held up the journal. "This is the truth, isn't it?" I shouted. "You trapped yourself here with your own greed and cruelty." Dunraven's eyes burned with rage, but his form flickered as if weakened by my words. "You don't understand," he growled. "Without me, this place will fall to chaos. I am the guardian." "No," I said firmly. "You're a prisoner of your own making. and it's time to end this. I grabbed the locket from the chest and hurled it at him. The moment it struck, a blinding light filled the room. Dunraven let out a piercing scream as his form dissolved into the light, leaving behind a deafening silence. When I emerged from the hidden chamber, the oppressive energy of room 401 was gone. The air felt lighter, and the shadows no longer seemed to move on their own. I returned the journal and letters to the hotel staff, who promised to preserve them as part of the Stanley's history. The mirror was removed and replaced with a plain one, severing the last connection to Dunraven's spirit. Though I left the Stanley Hotel that day, the experience stayed with me. Lord Dunraven's ghost was a reminder of the darkness that can linger when greed and cruelty go unchecked. To this day, room 401 remains one of the most talked about places at the Stanley Hotel. Some say Dunraven's spirit is gone for good, while others believe he still lingers in the shadows watching. One thing is certain, the room is no longer the same, and neither am I. If you ever find yourself at the Stanley Hotel, tread carefully. The past has a way of clinging to places and people in ways we can't always see. Thank you for joining me on this terrifying journey. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and share. Stay tuned for more spine-chilling tales of the paranormal.